My name's Amy, and I never thought I'd be the one to shred my own marriage, to take 8 years of what I'd convinced myself was a solid, scrappy life and let it unravel like a thrift store Afghan, threads snapping and tangling until I couldn't tell whose knots were uglier. Mine or my husband's, twisted together in the ruins of a home we'd patched with grit and promises. I was 33, a part-time florist at Petals and Stems off Vista Avenue in Boise, still wiry from lugging buckets and snipping stems, my dark blonde hair still holding a shine when I wrestled it into a clip, dodging the sticky sap and prickly thorns of my workbench. Ryan was 34, my husband, a barista manager at Brew Haven downtown, the kind of guy who'd trudge home with espresso dust on his apron and a lopsided grin, who'd tackle our creaky garage door with a socket set and a fixed-it hon, his brown eyes crinkling when he'd hand me a lukewarm decaf after a long shift. We'd met in 2016 at the Boise Farmers Market near the state capitol. A crisp September morning, me haggling over a bunch of dahlias with a vendor, him stationed at a coffee cart, doling out free latte samples and slipping me a, "You look like a cream no-sugar gal," with a wink that snagged me right in the gut. That was him, quiet, steady, the kind of man who'd spend a Saturday roasting beans in our kitchen or nailing up a birdhouse, who'd leave me sticky notes scrawled with, "You're my bloom," on the fridge door next to the grocery list. We'd built a life from nothing. A cramped one-bedroom rental off Overland Road our first year, then a fixer-upper in a sleepy Boise suburb by 18 after we clawed together a down payment. A boxy little house with a sagging front porch, a patchy backyard where we'd sown wildflower seeds, and a garage that smelled of oil and sawdust. He was my anchor. Kisses on my temple after a wedding order chaos. "Love you," Ames growled over instant oatmeal in chipped bowls. Lazy nights on the couch with takeout pad thai and Parks and Rec reruns flickering on our thrift store TV. Our mutt, Clover, sprawled across my lap, her snores a soft hum against the hum of the heater. Friends swore we were the blueprint. My dad mailed us heirloom seed packets every spring with notes about his garden. Ryan's sister bunked with us for Boise State football weekends, crashing on our lumpy pullout. Our neighbors gave a nod when Ryan's Subaru Forester rolled up beside my rust-pocked Corolla. A snapshot of Northwest normalcy etched in cedar fences and gravel drives. We didn't have kids, talked about it over beers at the kitchen table, always pushed it to someday. But at 33 I still felt scrappy, grounded, my smock and faded jeans hiding a body I'd kept decent through years of hauling flower crates and biking the Boise Greenbelt. But 8 years in, that fire we'd had, the one that kept us up late in that rental steaming up the windows with our breath, or giggling in his car by the Boise River, the water glinting under a harvest moon, had dimmed, settled into a drone of work shifts, bills and quiet evenings where the loudest sound was Clover's tail thumping the floor. I never thought I'd wander, never pictured myself as the type to tear apart what we'd glued together with elbow grease and trust. It started small, a stray dog I fed to fill the silence. I didn't know it'd spiral into a secret that dog's owner, a meddling widow next door, would hear every word of, or that Ryan had been brewing his own betrayal with her, turning our life into a double-crossed mess. It slid in so slow I didn't feel it until it was a gaping wound, a restlessness I couldn't name that gnawed at me like a splinter under a nail. Ryan and I were okay, or that's what I kept telling myself, what I'd repeat in my head while I trimmed rose stems or wiped down the shop counter. But the years had worn us thin, sanded down the raw heat we'd had back when we'd spend nights plotting garden patches on that rental's saggy couch, the air thick with the scent of his coffee grounds and my lavender sprigs, or when we'd sneak off to make out in his hatchback by the riverbank, the cottonwoods rustling overhead, his hands warm under my sweater as we fogged the glass. Those early days were jagged, vivid. Me arranging boutonnieres and fussing with peonies at the shop, him pulling double shots and tweaking pour-overs at the cafe, stealing kisses over flaky croissants from the market, our fingers brushing like we were tethered by static. We'd shacked up after a year, a snap decision when my roommate bailed on rent, him saying, "Just move in," over a pint of IPA at Bitter Creek Ale House, his knee knocking mine under the table, and it stuck. We signed for that overland rental, dragged my particle board dresser up a creaky stairwell with Clover yipping at our heels, laughed until we wheezed when the mattress frame buckled under us that first night, the springs twanging like a broken guitar string. By year 3 we'd hustled enough for the house. A beat-up foreclosure we'd snagged off a realtor friend and made ours with cans of paint and stubborn grit. Him in a faded Boise State sweatshirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, me with a sponge and a bucket, both of us streaked with eggshell white and sawdust, blasting the Avett Brothers from a Bluetooth speaker propped on the porch railing, the neighborhood's hum seeping through the cracked windows. We tied the knot at year 4, a small gig up by Lucky Peak Reservoir, me in a sundress I'd scored at a thrift shop on State Street, him in a flannel shirt that tugged at his broad shoulders, our friends toasting with cans of Coors Light and sloppy hugs as the water shimmered behind us, the late summer breeze carrying the scent of pine and barbecue smoke. It was us, rough-edged, honest, a love I'd have bet my bones on holding fast. But 8 years later, that love had settled into a rhythm too steady to stir me. Him up at 5 a.m. to open the cafe, me at Petals and Stems by 9, dinners of his venison chili or my half-assed stir-fry from whatever was in the fridge, nights where he'd scroll through coffee roasting forums on his phone while I doodled bouquet ideas on a notepad beside him, Clover's snores threading through the quiet like a metronome keeping time we didn't notice slipping away. I'd catch him sometimes, his apron strings frayed and knotted, his Brewhaven cap flipped backward, his jaw shadowed with a day's stubble, and feel this hollow ache, like he was drifting into a fog even though he was slouched right there on our hand-me-down couch, like we were roommates splitting a mortgage instead of lovers sharing a life. I was 33 now, still fast on my bike along the Greenbelt or hefting crates of mums at the shop, my hair still dark blonde when I didn't let it knot up in the Boise wind, but the bathroom mirror showed the toll, fine lines fanning out from my eyes like cracks in dry soil, a softness in my cheeks I'd glare at under the harsh fluorescent buzz, a tiredness I couldn't shake even with a double shot of Ryan's best brew. Work was reliable but draining, tying satin ribbons around corsages, soothing brides who'd changed their minds 3 times about lilies, the shop a whirlwind of floral scents, ringing phones and playlists I'd curated to drown out the monotony. And with Ryan buried in espresso machines, inventory counts and training new hires, the spark we'd had felt like a memory I couldn't grasp, a flicker I'd chase in the quiet moments before sleep but never catch. I didn't plan to stray, I swore to myself I'd never be that woman, the one who'd break a vow made under a September sky, but a loneliness I couldn't pin down started clawing at me, prying open a gap I didn't bother to close, a space I didn't even realize was there until it was too wide to ignore. It began with the dog, a scruffy little stray I'd spot sniffing around our cul-de-sac, a wiry mutt with matted tan fur, no collar, no tags, just a pair of soulful brown eyes and a tail that wagged like it was keeping time to a song only he could hear. I'd see him on my walks home from the shop, his paws kicking up dust along the sidewalk, or catch him rooting through a tipped trash can down the street, and I figured he'd wandered in from the foothills beyond our suburb, maybe dumped by some jerk who didn't want the hassle. One rainy April evening, the sky spitting cold drizzle over Boise, I was on the porch shaking out my umbrella when he trotted up, soaked and shivering, nosing at the steps like he smelled the leftover roast beef in my sandwich. I tore off a chunk and tossed it down, watching him gulp it with a grateful wag, his fur plastered flat under the streetlight's glow, and something in me softened, a little crack in the wall I'd built around the quiet that had settled into our house. He kept coming back after that, scratching at the backyard fence, peering through the kitchen window with those pleading eyes, his nose smudging the glass, and I started leaving out bowls of kibble I'd nabbed from Clover's stash, calling him Scout, a name that stuck like it had always been his. He'd sit with me in the grass, Clover watching warily from the deck with a low grumble, and I'd talk, first about nothing, the drizzle turning the wildflowers soggy, a customer who'd yelled about wilted carnations, then more the way Ryan's "love you" had gone flat, how I missed the guy who'd spin me around that rental's tiny kitchen to banjo strums, his hands rough from grinding beans but gentle on my hips. It felt safe, he'd just tilt his head, lick my fingers, his damp fur brushing my jeans, and I'd keep going, letting the words spill like water from a cracked vase. Soon it was a ritual. Every night after Ryan texted running late, I'd grab my hoodie, leash Clover to keep her from chasing him off, and walk Scout around the block, the cul-de-sac sodium lights buzzing overhead, the air sharp with pine and wet earth, confessing things I'd never say out loud anywhere else. I told him about Tyler, the delivery guy who'd started lingering at the shop, 28, lean from hauling crates with a crooked smile and a "see ya, Amy," that hit me like a jolt after months of Ryan's distracted nods. I admitted I'd started texting him back, how his "you're too good for this gig" made my chest buzz, how I'd let him kiss me in the shop's backroom one Thursday after close, the air heavy with rose pollen and the hum of the cooler, my heart slamming as his lips pressed mine, a line I'd crossed without looking back. Scout became my anchor, my mute therapist. Those walks stretched longer, my voice quieter, spilling every detail of Tyler's laugh, the way he'd tease me about my pruning shears, The guilt that chewed me up after I'd sneak home to Ryan's "Hey Hon" and Clover's wagging tail. I didn't know Scout wasn't just a stray, or that every word I whispered was being caught by someone else, someone close enough to ruin me. The affair with Tyler ignited fast, a wildfire I couldn't, or wouldn't, douse. Ryan's schedule handed it fuel: late closes at Brew Haven, weekends training green baristas at a new location out by Meridian, nights he'd roll in past 11 with "Stock Took Forever" and collapse on the couch, Clover nudging his hand for a scratch. Tyler slipped into the cracks, texts turning sharp, "Miss your laugh" popping up at 10 p.m., me tapping back, "Miss your chaos," my stomach flipping as I dimmed the screen under the quilt. Ryan snores a steady rhythm beside me, Clover's tail thumping softly against the bed frame. It jumped from shop banter to stolen hours, his walk up off Fairview Avenue, a cluttered bachelor pad with a sagging futon, a stack of empty pizza boxes and a fridge stocked with Pabst Blue Ribbon, when Ryan thought I was at book club with Jen. My Corolla tucked behind a Winco Foods lot when I'd claim grabbing milk and bread. A frantic tangle in his delivery van one Tuesday afternoon off Chinden Boulevard, the back piled with floral boxes shifting around us, his hands sliding under my shirt. My breath steaming the windshield as semis roared past outside. "We're so fucked," I'd laugh, sprawled on his stained carpet, a beer can rolling nearby, and he'd grin, "Fuck's where it's at," tugging me back into him until the world blurred, until I couldn't tell where my lies ended and his touch began. I'd come home after, splash cold water on my face, reheat a bowl of chili, sit across from Ryan when he trudged in, his apron slung over his shoulder, Clover weaving between his legs with a happy yip, and feel the guilt claw up my throat, his "Missed you" aims soft and trusting as I nodded, "You too," hating how smooth the lie rolled off my tongue, how it had gotten so easy to smile through it. I thought I had it wired: burner app for texts hidden behind a fake calculator icon, cash for gas or coffee runs so nothing traced, alibis about girls' nights at Barb's, or late wedding orders, that stretched past dusk. And Ryan swallowed it whole, or so I figured, his faith in me a curtain I ducked behind without a second glance. I'd still walk Scout every night, Clover trailing behind on her leash, the cul-de-sac dark and still, the air crisp with frost or thick with summer dust, confessing every step, Tyler's smirk when he'd drop off Gerber daisies, the van's vinyl seats sticking to my skin, the shame that hit me like a hangover when I'd crawl into bed beside Ryan's sleeping form. I thought Scout was my sanctuary, my silent witness, a scruffy little priest taking my sins without a word, until I learned he was wired and someone else was holding the confession booth. It wasn't just the hookups, it was the pull, the way Tyler saw me, not Amy the wife, Amy the florist cutting stems in a backroom, but Amy the untamed, the girl who'd skinny dipped in the Boise River at 22 with a bonfire crowd cheering her on, who'd belted out folk tunes at a campground until her voice gave out, embers popping in the night. He'd text at odd hours, "Can't shake you today," and I'd fire back, "Dangerous spot to linger," grinning into the dark while Ryan slept beside me, his arms slung over the pillow, Clover snores a low drone from the rug by the bed. At the shop it was a dance, his hand brushing mine when he'd hand over a clipboard, "Your trouble Ames," murmured low when I'd sign for a shipment of tulips, the air between us crackling with something unspoken, alive, a charge I hadn't felt since Ryan and I were new, when every glance was a spark, every touch a jolt. We stole moments, lunch breaks at a taco stand off State Street, his fingers grazing my wrist over a greasy foil tray of carnitas, the sun baking the asphalt around us, errands, to Fred Meyer when Ryan thought I was picking up potting soil or dog treats, my Corolla idling in a shadowed corner of the lot while we tangled in the back seat, the windows fogging as Boise buzzed beyond, a night at his buddy's trailer out near Cuna, sagebrush whispering in the wind outside, his breath hot against my neck as I braced against a chipped Formica counter, the vast quiet of the high desert swallowing us whole. The secrecy made it burn brighter. Every creak of our porch steps a spike in my pulse, every sweep of headlights past our cul-de-sac a shiver down my spine, every touch a rebellion against the life I'd vowed to Ryan under that reservoir sky, a life I'd once thought was enough. "We're toast," I'd pant, breathless, sprawled across his futon with the Boise heat pressing through the walls, and he'd laugh, "Toast's my jam," his rough hands pulling me under again, his stubble scraping my skin until I forgot the weight of my ring. Ryan's world left openings. Nights he'd stay late to close the shop. Weekends he'd head to Meridian to train a batch of clumsy baristas. Mornings he'd stumble in smelling of coffee grounds and shop dust. his apron still tied loose around his waist, and Tyler filled them, his presence seeping into my days, his voice humming in my ear, his scent, gasoline from the van, sweat from a long haul, a faint chew of spearmint gum, overriding Ryan's espresso roast and flannel on the couch cushions where we'd once curled up with Clover between us. I'd call Ryan, "How's the shift going?" And he'd ramble about a rush of hipsters or a grinder jamming up, "Miss you, Ames," his voice crackling through the line while I sat on the couch where Tyler had pinned me an hour earlier, nodding into the phone, "Miss you too," the lie so polished it gleamed, so routine it didn't even sting anymore. I'd confess it all to Scout on those walks, Tyler's crooked grin, the van's creaking shocks, the way I'd catch myself smiling at work while wiring a wreath, the guilt that'd slam me when I'd see Ryan's note on the fridge next to a doodle of Clover, thinking he was my safe harbor, my four-legged priest, not knowing every word was being snagged by a mic I couldn't see, fed to someone who'd turn it against me. The unraveling started slow, a thread I didn't notice pulling until it was halfway out. Little things, glitches in the life I'd rigged so carefully. Mrs. Ellis, the widow next door, started acting odd, her curtains twitching more than usual when I'd leave for work, her pinched face peering over the fence when I'd water the wildflowers, her morning Amy clipped and knowing like she'd swallowed something sour. She was in her late 60s, a hunched figure with gray curls and a cardigan no matter the weather, always fussing over her roses or sweeping her pristine walk, the kind of neighbor who'd wave but never linger, who'd lived alone since her husband keeled over from a heart attack 5 years back. I'd see her with Scout sometimes, shooing him off her lawn with a broom, muttering about "damn strays." But I figured he was just a local drifter, not hers, so I kept feeding him, kept talking, kept spilling my guts under the cul-de-sac's buzzing lights. Then Ryan got weird too, his "love you" text shorter, his eyes darting when I'd ask about his day, his shifts stretching later with excuses that didn't quite line up. New kid broke the steamer, had to redo the schedule, and I'd nod, too buried in my own lies to dig into his. I'd catch him glancing next door when he'd take out the trash, a quick flick of his head toward Mrs. Ellis's house, but I'd shrug it off. Maybe he was just checking her gutters, like he'd offered once after a storm blew half her shingles loose. The neighborhood felt off too, Barb from across the street asking if I'd seen that dog with the weird collar, Jen from book club mentioning she'd spotted Ryan chatting with Mrs. Ellis by her mailbox, her tone too casual, too probing. I brushed it aside, kept feeding Scout, kept meeting Tyler, kept confessing, until it all blew apart, a night I didn't clock as the end until it smashed me flat. 9 months into the affair it crashed. A Friday in January I'd never forget, the air biting with frost, snow dusting our cul-de-sac like flour on a counter, the suburbs silent under a heavy gray sky. Ryan had a late shift, texted me at 5. "Closing's a mess, new guy fucked the till, home past midnight." Plenty of time, I figured, to sneak Tyler over after I locked up the shop. I'd finished at 6, the last bouquet, a gaudy mix of lilies and baby's breath for a bridezilla, wrapped and out the door, texted Tyler from the back room, "Ryan's out, 7-ish?" He pulled up fast, boots crunching the fresh snow, a 6-pack of Rainier swinging in his hand, his grin cutting through the dim glow of our porch light as I swung the door open, Clover barking from the backyard where I'd let her out to roam. "Bold move, Ames," he said, cracking a can with a hiss, and I smirked. "Only way I roll," snagging one as we dropped onto the couch, the heater clanking to life, Clover's yaps fading into the night. We didn't linger. 2 gulps, his mouth crashing into mine, the beer sharp and cold on my lips, the room tilting as we stumbled down the hall to the bedroom, shedding coats and scarves, Clover scratching at the back door with a faint whine I ignored. It was reckless. His weight sinking me into the mattress, my nails raking his back, the headboard thumping against the wall, the rush swallowing the dread, until the front door clicked, keys jangling loud and sharp, 8:15 glaring on my phone beside the bed. "Shit," I hissed, shoving him off, scrambling for a hoodie, my heart pounding like a jackhammer as I barked, "Window, go." He grabbed his jeans, bolted for the bedroom window, wrenching it open and tumbling out into the snow, and I raked shaky fingers through my hair, darted out just as Ryan stepped into the living room, his apron slung over his arm, his Brew Haven cap pulled low, his eyes flicking over the 2 cans on the coffee table, Tyler's jacket draped over the recliner, the faint crunch of boots retreating through the yard. He stopped dead, gaze narrowing, and I braced myself, screaming, fists flying, the explosion I'd begged for with every lie, but he didn't budge. He smirked, slow and bitter, reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding a USB drive onto the table with a soft clack. "Listen to this," he said, voice low and steady like he was reciting an order, and plugged it into his laptop on the counter. My voice crackled through the tinny speakers, clear as a bell, confessing to Scout on a walk last fall. "Tyler kissed me again today, backroom after close. I'm so screwed, Scout, but I can't stop." Every word I'd whispered to that dog, every detail of the affair, the guilt, the thrill, spilled into the room, recorded, undeniable. The air sucked out of me, my legs wobbling as I gripped the couch arm, Clover's whines rising from the yard, the snow tapping the windows like a countdown clock. "What the fuck?" I croaked, my voice a shred, and Ryan laughed, deep, hollow, a sound I didn't know he could make before dropping the bomb. "That's Mrs. Ellis's dog. Scout's hers. She stuck a baby monitor in his collar years ago to track him when he'd run off. Caught you blabbing instead. Been handing me the files since July. Your whole damn affair, Ames, every step." I stared, my stomach plummeting as he kept going, his words slicing deeper. "She's been my ear, my lifeline. Been seeing her 2 months now. She's lonely, I'm checked out, and you gave us the perfect exit." The room spun, my chest caving in. Mrs. Ellis, the widow I'd waved at over the fence, her roses pruned to perfection, her curtains always fluttering. Ryan sneaking next door, her pouring him tea or baking him those goddamn scones she'd bragged about at the block party, while I fed her dog my secrets under the streetlights. I'd been screwing Tyler in our bed, in his van, in every shadowed corner I could find, while Ryan was screwing her in her tidy little kitchen, and our marriage, the one I'd called solid, the one we'd toasted with market cider and a promise of forever, was a rotting husk, a double betrayal caught on a cheap mic looped around a stray's neck. "You recorded me?" I rasped, my throat scraped raw, and he nodded, slumping against the wall, his apron catching the lamplight, the Brew Haven logo mocking me. "She did. Mix live all the time, picks up everything within 10 feet. Caught you spilling to Scout last summer, handed me the first clip in August. Been meeting her ever since, she's my piece, Ames, my way out, and you just made it mutual." He smirked again, harder, colder, and scooped his keys off the hook by the door. "She's waiting next door. Loyal, call you tomorrow." He walked out, past the couch where we'd marathoned the office with Clover sprawled between us, the kitchen where we'd burned soup and laughed about it, the life we'd play-acted for 8 years, leaving me with Clover's howls echoing through the yard, the USB looping my confessions like a broken record, and a truth that gutted me to the core. The neighbor's dog knew my secret, she turned it into a weapon, and Ryan had his own knife sharpened and ready to match.